Hi, I'm Kevin,
And I'm Amanda.
and we are serving up.
All that jam. A lighthearted look at the weekend jam bands.
Where we break down the jam scene's biggest stories,
Talk new bands.
upcoming tours,
And show reviews. A little laughing, some hot takes, and an always positive message for the community.
February 20th, 2023.
All right, we're back, middle of February. This week we have an interview with Mike Dillon. Part of our interview got into some punk rock with him and other things, but we're going to focus more on this interview on the songwriting and stuff like that. We also have the top 3 stories of the week coming up. And do we have anything else there, Amanda?
Yeah, I posed a question on some of our socials that relates to some of the interviews we've been having lately, Kevin, and I can't wait to dig into that a little bit later.
Very nice, very nice. So, do you have an exciting week?
Oh, this week was a lot of work. Yeah, missed a couple shows I wanted to get to, but that happens sometimes. Last week, was fun, but a bunch of people I know got COVID from Jam Cruise, Rare Earth shows, etc. So it's a thing that I'm thinking about again a little bit.
Right? It hasn't gone away. It's,
No.
I guess for me, it's a matter of what am I willing to do? Am I willing to wear a mask?
And the inconvenience, right? Like at this point. So as you know, I'm traveling this week, and I just did not want the inconvenience of having to deal with it.
Right.
So kind of stayed away from some stuff, but
Cruise has to be like one of the biggest. It's probably as bad as MSG for getting walks COVID because you're trapped on a boat. I mean, it's like
I know.
if one person has it, everybody's gonna, it's gonna get out there.
Yeah, unless they literally just pass out on the deck in the open air every single night. And
Right.
even then, who knows?
Yeah, even then, exactly. And it's all buffet.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they are. I don't know. I haven't been on a cruise forever, but I'm assuming it's still the, throw in your feed bag thing and, take as much as you want.
I'm sure.
God
I don't
help
know
us.
either, but I hope it's that way because that's what I would want to do.
Yes, exactly, exactly. This next week, I'm trying to get out to see Magic Beans Thursday night with Natalie Brooke, who we spoke to, and Gator on drums. Their band Infinity Tribe is opening, so we'll see what happens with that. But
Oh,
you're gonna be
great.
on my coast
I
hanging
am.
out.
I'm going to be on the East Coast all week, so not too much music. But next weekend, over at Cervantes, we've got Mike Dillon and Space Bacon. They're hitting both
Oh,
sides. Isn't that so
oh,
cool?
nice space. I'm glad to see him getting out. I'm really interested in what the new guitar player is sounding like with him.
Yeah. So that one dual entry, so you can get to the other side and the ballroom
Wow.
back and forth. So I'm really excited. I thought that was just great, kind of great timing for us, given that we've chatted with all of
And
them.
we're going to be listening to some of that Mike Dillon in a little bit. But I guess right now we're going to hop into
The top 3 stories of the week.
Okay, Kevin, got some stories as always. This first one has been making the rounds a little bit on the socials. FluGrass. Have you heard about FluGrass?
I only know because you tipped me off to it, but I watched this live stream. Why don't you tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about it?
Yeah, so let's see. It was Saturday night, the 18th. Billy Strings was in my home state in Atlantic City, New Jersey, wrapping up a 3-night run. Know a bunch of people that were out there. Another sold out show. And he admitted to the audience that he felt like shit, um, but then began a concert, 28 songs. And people are comparing it to Michael Jordan's famous flu game, the one where he scored something like 40 points in the finals, that kind of thing. So I don't know about the comparison because I don't know anything about basketball. However, the show looked great. The set list looked amazing. A lot of great covers. And I just thought to myself, wow, he admitted it. I'm sure tons of artists perform sick and just don't say anything.
I saw something on socials where somebody said, "How can you forget the words to Dusk in a Baggie?" From I guess Friday night show from the 17th, and he said I was fighting through the flu. I'm hoping everything's going to be better tonight. I guess he didn't turn the corner like he thought. And he's like, but that's my fault. I should never He was, of course, his cordial, wonderful, sweet self
I was
that
going to say, someone of that stature in the scene basically kind of apologizing and feel like he needs to explain himself. I just find that so endearing in so many ways.
amazing the way he controls the crowd and his lyrics. I mean, if nothing else, I can only, 3 hours of bluegrass is a lot for me. I need some electric guitar, but his lyrics, like you listen and you're like, was that song written 100 years ago? Or is that something he wrote? I mean, it's just timeless. He's brilliant. Of all the people in our scene, I think he's like in a class by himself with that.
Well, I'm kind of with you, and I never was not a Billy Strings fan. I actually had seen him years ago sit in for a song with Cabinet, like at the Fox Theater. This is coming up on 8 years ago now. And it was like, who's this guy? Oh, he's great. What's his name? That kind of thing. It's funny to think about now. But even then, just had quite a persona on stage that was something that you just had to notice.
Sky's the limit for him. He may be the
100%.
biggest bluegrass artist ever.
You know what? He is more than well on his way. And so hopefully he's feeling better. But I think he's got shows like happening right after that one. So no rest for the weary, right?
He never stops. He doesn't.
Nope. So we wish him well. So that was our first story. The next story, again, as I see these, I kind of try to put the pieces together on this whole Ticketmaster Live Nation situation. Just last week, Live Nation, they had an antitrust lawsuit brought about in, I think, 2020 or 21, class action type thing, and it was thrown out of federal court. This was Live Nation and Ticketmaster were both being sued. The grounds were that the buyers of the tickets forfeited their rights to sue by agreeing to the terms of use, which all of us do 1,000 times a day.
Right.
So as a precedent, that is something that I think I want to just kind of wrap my head around.
So if you buy a ticket, you've basically given up all your rights.
Yeah, more or less. So according to this ruling, customers can only file suit against these ticketing companies in private arbitration, so not a class action suit. And you know what that means, Kevin? Who's going to do that? Nobody's going to do that, for the money they would pay for attorneys and whatnot. So attorneys for the plaintiffs that basically included hundreds of thousands, if not millions of customers.
We were probably part of it.
I'm sure we were. Challenged the validity of the user agreement, saying it was, hidden from online customers. Duh. Of course it is.
Never read it. Never even seen it. I can remember reading the back of printed tickets when I was a teenager, and it had, this is a revocable use license. Basically, if you were an ass in the show, they could throw you out.
Right. Well, you want to hear about another asshole, Judge Danny Boggs? Can I tell you what he wrote? Okay, so it's this 3-judge panel. He says, at 3 independent stages, when creating an account, signing into an account, and completing a purchase, Ticketmaster and Live Nation webpage users are presented with a confirmation button above which text informs the user that by clicking on this button, you agree to our terms of use. A reasonable user would have seen the notice and been able to locate the terms via hyperlink. What a dick.
Yeah, but the issue with that is if you went and bothered to read the terms, you would lose your place in line and lose the tickets.
You would, yes, that's the number one issue. Also, as we all know, those terms, everything is written in a way to favor the companies. So even if you did want to take your time and find it, it's not going to be something
and you wouldn't understand it. It's all legal doublespeak. I was a paralegal at one time, and I still struggle to read contracts and stuff, you know? Man.
Yeah. Well, I just saw that and I said, that's a little ridiculous. But you know what? That's maybe how things are going to go. I mean, it's going to be a tough battle no matter what.
It's going to be, Congress is going to have to break them up like they broke up AT&T.
It's not going to be us. It's like recycling. Yeah. My root beer can that I'm recycling is not on its own going to save, the earth, even though I still feel bad if I don't.
Right. Exactly.
All right. I digress. That was our second story. Okay. The third one, Forbes just recently put out the annual list of its top 10 highest paid entertainers. So Kevin, if I were to guess, I would not have guessed the artist that came in at the top of this list. So let me just tell you a little bit about this because I was kind of surprised. Taylor Swift, no, you would think she has a pretty good shot at it. I mean, she had a really big 2022, moving millions of copies of things, you know?
Pink
Um,
had a huge tour
mhm, that's right. Absolutely. No, it was Genesis. So
because of the catalog.
that's right. So yeah, they had that large scale publishing deal. They sold off a bunch of assets, everything. So similar to Genesis, Sting was number 2 on the list after having like that $300 million deal for his solo work and
So I
stuff.
wonder if you just pulled Phil Collins out or one member of Genesis, whether they'd be at
Hmm.
top. It probably not because,
Yeah,
but
yeah. I
that's
don't
good.
know.
I mean, Genesis, good for them. We talked about that before. I did not know that Sting did the same thing.
I hadn't realized that either. But you know, it just goes to show. What's interesting about this list is I have to get away from the idea that it's all about the record sales and that kind of thing. No, I mean you've got Trey Parker and Matt Stone were in 4th place because of some payout of like a $935 million deal with Paramount. So that's what it is.
And so this was just all entertainers because obviously South Park
Correct.
is not a musician.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. It was just 10 highest paid entertainers of 22.
Interesting.
Yeah.
More money than me.
Oh God. Yeah. I won't go down that road, but yeah, agree. So those are our top 3 stories of the week.
All right. Well, that's fantastic. We definitely have to keep our eye, as always, on the whole Ticketmaster thing because it may be the single most important issue affecting us as consumers of music. So we will do that. All right, let's jump into this Mike Dillon interview. Mike Dillon has been all over for many, many years, and he was so upfront and about everything in his life. And what we pulled out first was him talking about songwriting. He released an album over quarantine called Suitcase Man, which was a more singer-songwriter thing, which you don't think of him as. And what we're going to hear is he's going to talk about playing with Annie DiFranco and Rickie Lee Jones and, how that affected his songwriting. And we'll see you on the other side. Well, so let's talk about that Suitcase Man. It's
Yeah.
fantastic. I've heard you mention Elliott Smith when talking about it. So my daughter, I had to mention Elliott Smith. That's her god. She's 16.
I love
Totally.
Elliot Smith. My wife will be like, we'll be driving and she'll be like, okay, we've listened to Elliot for 8 hours today. And we listened to something else. And I'll be like, okay, I know. Yeah.
So Suitcase Man is a songwriter album. Can you want to talk a little bit? You had started to mention this, but say from like Billy Goat to now, what your progression as a songwriter is.
Well, yeah, and with Billy Goat, I was just like writing really terrible but fun lyrics. I mean, like fuck more, bitch less. So with like abstract, just non sequitur after non, and it was more about the rhyme and literally trying to be as abstract as possible or just as stupid as possible. You were 25, it was the funk punk days. It was all about having fun. When the Chili Peppers got serious and wrote Under the Bridge, I'm like, what are you doing getting serious? This is funk.
Right.
George Clinton said, for it to be funky, the fun is the key, right?
Right.
So, but of course, everyone grows up and matures. I started getting into Nick Drake, Elliott Smith, different, and then working with Ani DiFranco and Rickie Lee, getting into Tom
She is
Waits.
a songwriter.
I mean, I started playing because I can play percussion. I started touring with singer-songwriters. Ani was the first one, and at that time I was touring with Claypool. I would come from a Claypool tour, and I'd be want to like rip it with Ani, and she'd be like, "Hey, calm down." And then I learned the art of like just less is more and supporting a song, and then you'd see just how like intense like their focus on the lyrics are. Like every songwriter, like like Ani, and then she would have all these great people with her opening for her, like Hamill on Trial. I don't know if you know him, but he's incredible. Um, the lady who ended up writing Hades Town, like, so there was just this. It was a whole nother world for me getting around songwriters. And then when I went with Rickie Lee, it was like being with one of the greats of all time. And hearing her talk about like when her and Tom Waits and Chucky Wise were all like 21 years old or whatever, hanging out in LA. And because one day I go, well, I was helping Rickie Lee produce a record in 2018. I was like, hey, why don't you make a record of original songs again? Because we were doing all covers and it was great. And she said, well, it's really intense to make original music and write songs. And she's like, and truthfully, I don't know if I have the energy right now to write. She's in her, she's like 67 right now. And that was a few years back. So she was in her 60s. She's just like, I don't know if I emotionally have it in me.
Right.
And I go, well, why don't you just make it fun like you were when you were 21? And she was like, we were working. Like, it was like the way jazz musicians, we practice 2-5-1s or our instrument. You just realize like how intense. And at the time she was writing her great book. So anyway, it just started like, and then like at shows when I see Rickie Lee or Ani just play with their guitar to 1,500 people and be so fearless and vulnerable, I started going, well, I want to do that with my microphone.
Right. It's hard to put yourself out there like that. It's like putting your kid out there and everyone's going to beat your kid up.
Yeah. So, and Suitcase Man, the first song we wrote was Suitcase Man. And that was Peregrine and myself in the first month of the pandemic, whenever a musician would just go on Facebook or posting a little thing on Instagram. And that was all people could get for entertainment unless it was watching something that had already been made. And I remember when I put Suitcase Man out there, all these people were like, whoa, we didn't know you could do that. That's really cool. So I got the balls to be like, all right, I'm going to do also a record of just vibes and marimba. And it was a project, like Peregrine and I wrote the lyrics. I would start something and she'd look at it and go, oh, that's horrible. And it was fun collaborating. I'd be like, no, it isn't. That's really cool. So we talk through it. A band again where you're just like sort of fighting each other to come up with something better.
All right. I think a lot of people in the jam band scene need an editor, need a collaborator sometimes with some of the lyrics that show up.
Well, look at I've never been a super big Deadhead, but having, gone out and worked with Keller Williams or some of these bands that cover the Dead, when I really started listening to some of those lyrics,
it's like, wow.
Jerry sing, you're like, okay, there's a reason why the Grateful Dead sold out fucking stadiums.
Right, exactly.
Robert Hunter wrote some lyrics. Like, even if that's not your thing and you want to go hear the Bad Brains, I did see the Dead with Jerry, and seeing Jerry play to 30,000 people, I was like, okay, this guy is like Willie Nelson,
Right.
Kevin, I loved hearing Mike talk about how he has matured and had different influences over the years. And also just trying to imagine him going from playing with Les Claypool to Rickie Lee or Ani DiFranco and what that must have been like for anyone around at that time. So we're going to get into this next clip here where Mike has some really good insight on recording with Jerry Harrison and being in the studio versus touring. But before we get into that, did want to mention a couple of things for everybody out there. Please make sure that you head to social media. Everywhere, we are All That Jam Pod. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, we are allthatjampod.com on the World Wide Web. And we just want to make sure we've been dropping so many of these shorts, clips of interviews. So hopefully you get a chance to check those out.
Yes, definitely. Make sure you follow, like, subscribe so you don't miss these things. They're like 3 minutes. So you're sitting in line waiting for your kids before school at drop off or pickup. You could probably pop 2 or 3 of them out and not be tied down to a whole podcast.
That's right. Just let it roll.
You know, so what were we checking out again here?
Sorry, we're going to get into Mike talking about recording with Jerry Harrison and then discussing a little bit about tour life as well.
Very nice.
I got to do one record with Jerry Harrison from the Talking Heads, and I didn't understand the process back then, but it was a great introduction. But I was still thinking like, oh, you know, we just play the live record and then we make it badass, you know. And yet he'd be telling me, well, when the Talking Heads did, you know, Remain in Light, you know, we were doing this and doing that. And it was still just like baffling it being 25 years old and trying to wrap my head around it.
But you just kind of say, all right, maybe this guy knows what he's talking about.
Well, yeah, you do. And then like, it was funny because now I'm remembering, like, he was the first guy to go. He goes, you know, Mike, you have a Iggy Pop quality. And I had checked the Stooges a little bit, but at the same time, he was like, so there's this new program called Pro Tools. And this was 92.
Oh, wow.
So I was actually 27. And he's like, so would you be object to me tuning your vocals up a little bit? Because I sang out of tune, you know. And I was like, that's not punk rock. That's not cool. You can't do that. And of course, you hear years later that great vocalists use the shit from time to time.
Right.
But it was just sort of funny. Like, but I remember him telling me like the Violent Femmes, like now like drummers, they make drum loops like in Pro Tools. It takes you 2 minutes. But he was telling me like, oh, on this Violent Femmes record, we wanted to have a drum loop. So we ran the tape, all 3 tape machines all around the room. And we chopped up the best part and made a loop out of it and then recorded it back. You know, it's just like, wow.
How do you approach going into the studio versus doing a live show?
It used to be you would tour, get your live show together with the new songs, then go right into the studio and just play it down. During the pandemic, because everyone was separated, I really got into the art of starting with a badass analog drum machine pattern, you know, programming it and then building all the, you know, sort of taking what I'd done in GarageBand, because I like writing my songs in GarageBand, a lot of them, and then writing them and then building them up and then sending the tracks out to different musicians. That's what I did on the Quarantine trilogy.
Okay.
And, you know, if it was something where I did everything, then great. You know, it's like I get to get my Trent Reznor or Prince on, you know, just do everything. And for me, there was nothing else to do. So I really enjoyed that.
Right.
And then, of course, I can't play guitar. So it'd be like, okay, need a guitar. So I'd send it out to my guitar player buddies.
Right. Pull out the Rolodex.
Kevin, one of the things that I was kind of chuckling about when I listened to this back again is Mike was talking about during the pandemic, he got into that art of starting with drum machine. And I immediately thought, oh, like Prince did. And then about 2 seconds later, he says, oh yeah, you know, like Trent Reznor and Prince. So I loved, like you said, how honest he was about his process and everything he does. And speaking of, this last clip from Mike is going to be him talking a little bit about his personal life philosophy. So let's check that out.
What are some of your personal philosophies on life or music, the universe?
Well, they're always changing. The universe is always changing. It's very interesting. As you get older, you realize the things you worried about when you were in your 30s or 20s really don't fucking matter.
Not at all.
And I remember the old guys telling me that shit when I was like going through things. And their advice to me would, one of them who's since passed on, he's just always just like, all right, man. And at the time, I think he was like 40 and I thought he was really old when I was like 27 and starting to get a little rowdy in my personal life. He was just like, just don't kill yourself, man.
That's a good advice.
Well, you know, and especially with like, I don't know. I would say my main personal philosophy now is I'm just trying to be of service and to give back and be more loving in general and come from a place of love now instead of a place of intense competition and anger. I mean, I still got that competitive streak that I think capitalism puts in you.
Yeah.
But I really do think there's enough for everyone on the planet.
Definitely.
You know, I think a lot of where I'm at these days is just trying to be mindful, to live in the now, and to stay out of the fear. Like we've sort of known, like the lessons that we learned, if you were seeking, like, you know, I started checking out Buddhism and yoga and occult philosophy. And of course, like I told you, that guy, Robert Anton Wilson, I liked reading him because he was sort of a guy that digested all the heavy philosophers, whether it was Nietzsche or Kierkegaard or Plato or Socrates, and would just sort of, yet he was hanging out with Leary and doing acid. And, you know, he would talk about Burroughs or B.F. Skinner or Noam Chomsky, not in a political sense, but more like the behaviorist person.
And the linguist and all that, yeah. I love taking little pieces from here, a little bit from there, a little make your own thing up.
And even back then, you just sort of like, they were like, all right, we're all going to die, but don't get fearful about it. Like transcend it, whether it's transcendental meditation or whatever. Like, and when you're 20, you think you're bulletproof and you're going to live forever. Yet, ironically, that's when most people really have a hard time figuring out who they are and their identity. And there's a lot of suicide or drug problems. And my friends that have kids, they're just trying to get them through that time period without
my youngest is in her senior year of high school. Yeah. I'm right there at the finish line.
Yeah. I mean, hats off to you. It's like the most important thing you can do is raising a beautiful human.
Yeah, they're good kids.
I thought it was bad and crazy back in the 80s when we had Ronald Reagan and Ollie North and Bush the one, or Bush the two. Prescott Bush was the first. But, you know, you were just like, well, by 2020, we're just going to live in this utopian society where there's no racism, there's no greed. Everyone, we're going to, you know, the hundreds.
Or the exact opposite.
Utopia for mankind. Wrong. It's worse than friggin' ever.
Right. When I was in college, I wrote a whole poem called Agrotopia, and it was about that. That was the future. Yes.
Well, I think you were right. You know, my altruistic hippie, punk hippie vision of that maybe something was going to get better. And then it's like, I don't know, maybe it is better in a lot of ways, but maybe we just see how fucked up it is and always has been.
Yeah, he's just, he's a great guy. And some of the clips we have coming up are, I'm just going to give a little teaser. Maybe next week, the week after, we have Mike talking about seeing Bad Brains for the first time. He and I got into quite a little bit about punk rock because I'm a fan, and I think that's part of his DNA too. And also a clip about the time he met Burroughs, William S. Burroughs, and how that caused a life change for him. So you'll have to look for that coming soon. Now we're going to get into this question you posted on Twitter and Instagram and everywhere, and I find it fascinating. So you want to let us know exactly what it says?
Yes. So, you know, I've noticed that lately you and I have been talking with a fair amount of instrumental-only bands, or I would say instrumental-focused bands versus having a lot of lyrics, and those conversations have been really interesting to me. So I was curious, you know, the consensus from those artists is that, in their opinion, which I think makes a lot of sense, that for mainstream success, lyrics are a necessary thing. But they don't really care about that. That's not what they do, right? And I love that. So I was just curious what people's preferences are from, you know, at least the folks that connect with us online. So I asked, do you need lyrics to enjoy a band? Simple question, just really curious. And I guess my circles may not be the mainstream ones, obviously. I'm not super surprised, but 82% of all the respondents said no. And then we had some really interesting comments on that along the lines of, you know, I can get lyrics where I want them and when I want them, but a lot of times I really just want to focus in on the music. So I thought that was really interesting.
When I first started listening to Fish, I mean, the first time, if people out there don't know, the first time I saw Fish, I had never heard them. I thought my buddy told me we were going to see an Allman Brothers cover band. So I walk in and it's Fish.
That's what he said.
Yeah, see, we thought it was he was like, man, an Allman Brothers cover band's playing the 8x10 tonight. We should go down, and we go down there and it's Fish, and it's
Wow.
so there we were. But it took me a long time to get comfortable with something like David Bowie that just had the two short little lyrics and that huge instrumental piece. I had to almost, reprogram myself from pop music and classic rock that there always was, lyrics. I mean, the last time there was a hit single that was an instrumental was probably like the 80s or 90s. I mean,
what a great trivia question. Okay, now I'm going to have to look this up. Now I need to know, because you're right. I mean, we don't even question it because we know. I guess I never was originally programmed, to your point. So this is Fish, and that world is literally all I know. And so sometimes I do have to take a step back and realize, you know what, Amanda, that is just truly not what the vast majority of people either start out with or, come to this from. Makes total sense.
It does.
I'm just the weirdo like that.
I hear you with that. So speaking of that, let's this week on Wednesday we have Natalie Brooke. On Thursday we have the Allergies out of UK talking about their new single, which comes out Friday. And Friday we got Spafford when recording. It's the last part of our little series we've been doing on Fridays with them. Look for another band in a few weeks. But next week we have Mark Samuels from Basin Street. He's the founder and CEO of Basin Street Records. And then for our spotlights next week, we're doing a new band thing. Speaking of, you were talking about these instrumental bands, we're going to have Disco, Connives, and Oregon Fairchild on next week, talking about just how they got together. And we will have full interviews with all of them eventually. But yeah, it was fascinating them talking about, it's an interesting thing, how to hold an audience's attention without the lyric reference point for them. But actually one of Disco has vocals, but the other two didn't. So it'll be very interesting. You got anything else you want to get into this week?
You know what, Kevin? I'm going to hold because I have a feeling I'm going to have a lot to share after I go to that show at Cervantes next week. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Very nice. Very nice. It's going to be huge. Well, great. Like Amanda said earlier, find us on social media, like, subscribe, follow us on Apple, leave us a review. And remember, stay beautiful, but don't stay underground too long. I'll see you soon, Amanda.
Have an awesome week.